In the last few years of using Jsonrpcclient, I've realized that the library is doing way too much. It's not only working with request and response messages, but also sending the requests and receiving the responses as well. And this has caused most of the issues that people have had with the library because they don't have any control over the way that the messages are being sent and received. At the end of the day, JSON-RPC is just a message format, so this library should only be helping you with generating and parsing the payloads. It shouldn't be doing the transport. That should be left up to the user. So the decision was made in version 4 to remove the transport from the library, which will give the user complete control over how the messages are sent and received. And it will also mean that the library will work with any Python framework or transport protocol rather than just a few that were previously supported. So let's go ahead and use the library version 4. So here I'm going to import everything from the library. Obviously don't use star imports in your real code. Import the specific functions that you want to use from the library. So the two functions you're really going to need are request and parse. The request function just generates a JSON-RPC request. You can pass params by passing a tuple of params or a dictionary of params. These are valid JSON-RPC requests. You might have noticed that the ID is incrementing with every request from 1. This gives you a unique ID for every request, but there are other options for generating the ID, being hex. So this gives you a hex value incrementing from 1, random, or UUID. You may have also noticed that the actual output from request is not JSON string, it's a Python object that can be serialized to JSON. So if you actually want the JSON string, you can use a function called request.json instead of request, and that gives you a string. It just applies the json.dumps function after request. JSON-RPC also allows you to send notifications, which are requests without an ID. So to generate a notification in JSON-RPcclient, use the notification function. And that also has a JSON version. So JSON-RPC also allows you to send batch requests, which are multiple requests inside the one payload. So to show you how that would look in JSON-RPcclient, you just use a list of requests. So you might have request A, request B, request C, and then you've got a batch request, but you then need to apply json.dumps to get that as a string. So we'll import JSON and json.dumps on this, and then you get the full JSON string, each with their own unique ID. You could also generate a batch request using list comprehension, like say you want to send a different parameter for each request. So you would do for I in range 4. And then you get 4 requests in the one batch. So let's have a look at how this library can be used with the requests library. So we'll import requests, and then we'll do response equals requests.post. And I've got a server running on localhost port 5000. And we'll pass JSON equals request ping, because that's the method that's going to be running. So let's have a look at the response. So we got a response with the result of POM, and now we want to parse that response. So there's a function in JSON-RPcclient called parse JSON. So we'll use that. Parsed equals parse JSON response.text, and we get an object. Parsed, we get an object which is an OK object. It's a name tuple containing 2 attributes, result and ID. So we'll have a look at those. So this parse function actually gives you either an OK or an error response. So In reality, you're going to have to check whether the value is an OK or an error using runtime type checking. So just a very rough example of how you would do that would look like parsed result if isInstance parsed OK. OK is a value inside the library as well. Else parsed dot message, and message is an attribute of the error response. So there's a more sophisticated example of checking the result of the parse function in the examples directory of the repository. So I'll link to that in the description of the video.